Hello, everybody, and welcome to the War Room, where everyday struggles meet unstoppable strategies. We blend our faith in God with wisdom and practical tools to help you navigate life's toughest battles. Each episode unpacks real challenges with real solutions rooted in the belief that the fight is worth it and victory is within reach. I'm excited because we have a special guest today, and I'm going to introduce him in a second. But first and foremost, for those who are watching live, how's your week going? I know it's been a lot going on in the news cycle, and even today, unfortunately, we're praying for the families of those affected by the school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee. But there's a whole lot going on. But personally, for those who are watching, how are you doing? How are you feeling on this wonderful Wednesday? Go ahead and put just a one-word answer in our comment section. Let me know how you're doing and where you're watching us from. Go ahead and do that for me real quick. Now, I just want to share this text as these comments are coming in. I want to share a text with you that really, really encouraged me when I saw it. It's Romans 15, verse 13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. I pray this text will be a source of encouragement for somebody. Not sure how the weeks are going. I'm not sure how the week is going to go, but I pray that your hope will be anchored in our wonderful Lord and Savior. Now, today, I have a very interesting guest with me. His name is Greg Hamilton. He's retired after having served as president of the Northwest Religious Liberty Association for the North Pacific Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists for nearly 23 years, which continues to be recognized as the premier religious liberty and human rights advocacy organization in the states of Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. He led a team of 32 attorneys, 5 Capitol pastors or lobbyists, and 2 judges, which made up his board of executives. Right before we went live, he was telling me about the wonderful library that he and his wife were able to build out in Western Colorado. They built the Hamilton Library and Constitution Center, which offers seminars on America's constitutional founding and particularly emphasizing the framers' intent on enshrining the constitutional separation of church and state, which is interesting because his final graduate degree work at the J.M. Dawson Institute of Church and State Studies at Baylor University in Texas culminated in 402-page work entitled Sandra Day O'Connor's Judicial Philosophy on the Role of Religion in Public Life. Now, he's also served in ministry for quite some time. He was just sharing with me that he helped plant a church out in Connecticut, and he's also done some evangelistic work as well. I want you guys to do me a favor and please welcome our highly esteemed guest, our wonderful guest, who is a fan of one of my favorite teams, and he is sporting the hat right now, Mr. Greg Hamilton. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Man, I'm doing wonderful. I'm doing wonderful. Now, I have a random question before we get into our serious discussion for today. And I think it's more of a...
I just want to say one thing.
Yes.
I've spoken at a lot of churches in New York City.
Yes.
And one of my favorite churches was the Bethel Church in Brooklyn.
Oh.
And the last time I did that was in 2017 when Roger Moore was the pastor.
Yes.
And, oh, what a wonderful congregation. Man, I mean, we had church from sun up until midnight, it seemed. I mean, and every time I preached in the churches in New York, I mean, it was that way. It was just wonderful. I mean, they take their faith seriously,
Yes.
and I'm just telling you, I just have some very fond memories of my time in New York.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's I know Bethel Church. I lived maybe 20, 30 minutes from there. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And so, yeah, yes, we do take church very seriously. I remember the days of having to bring extra clothes to church, because you're going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
But Mr. Hamilton, I do have a question for you. Um,
Mhm.
it's a little bit out of the box, but if God were to grant you one thing to take with you to heaven, what would it be?
Mm. Honesty and integrity. Now, if you're talking about a thing,
Yeah,
or are you talking about
something
a
tangible.
characteristic?
Not a
Oh,
characteristic, but something tangible, you know,
mm,
something physical.
mm. Well, I'd probably take the Desire of Ages and my Bible. Those two
Okay.
things.
Okay. Desire Rages Bible. For those watching, you can go ahead and put your answers in the comment section. What would you take? If you got one physical thing you could take with you to heaven, what would it be? My answer would be a little bit different. I'd probably take a camera. That'd be my item. I'd take a camera. But your answer is a good one as well. Um, Now, when I originally reached out to you, my intent is very different. I think the last couple of days, things have changed, at least for me. Seeing and listening and reading all that's kind of unfolding in our country, I think our conversation is very timely. Um, but I want to know before we get into the kind of the deeper topics, after spending so much time, studying and dealing with religious liberty, how
Mhm.
would you define that for the everyday person? What is religious liberty and why should it matter today?
Well, religious liberty is something we as a church promote because it truly, more than any other ministry in our church, represents an attempt to defend the religious liberty rights of all people of faith and all those of goodwill. As in fact, I would say it's probably the most effective evangelistic tool out there. The problem is our church doesn't prioritize it very much, and as a result, we have a lack of staff
Mhm,
and a lack of personnel. And so, about the only thing we get out there is Liberty Magazine, and it mostly goes to thought leaders and not our church members. So it's a little bit difficult. But religious liberty is an effort to defend the religious freedom rights under the First Amendment of the Constitution, which says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, which is the No Establishment Clause, and the free exercise of religion. And it also promotes the religious freedom is guaranteed under anti-discrimination law under both state and federal Title VII law, which helps protect employees of faith, all people of faith, not just Seventh-day Adventist Christians, in the workplace against any form of religious discrimination. And that
mhm,
includes other areas. Sometimes many of my 4,103 cases in 23 years included a combination of both race and religious liberty.
mhm,
And some of them handicap, some of them age discrimination, some of them gender. Sometimes it was a combination.
mhm,
And so, we did thorough jobs of investigating, and of course, the General Conference litigation department helps us as well. And that's where a lot of your money goes from supporting Liberty Magazine. And it is still the Liberty campaign during the month of January right now. So I want to emphasize that because if you support Liberty Magazine, your money will go to support our litigation efforts as well as the promotion of religious liberty advocacy around the United States and around the world. So, anyway.
Okay, you mentioned that around the world perspective. Now, of course, we know, that there are some constitutional rights that we have here. You've done some work abroad as well.
Yes.
What does that look like, for other countries, and how are you able to kind of, spread that religious liberty message into different areas where the laws might be a little bit different from what we're experiencing here?
Well, I helped stop, it took me 10 years, but in Romania, I spoke in 28 different governmental assemblies in 28 different cities between 2004 and 2013. And I helped stop a 6-day work week law, which is essentially a Sunday law.
Mhm.
And basically, what you have in the Romanian constitution, which is true in most countries in Eastern Europe and around the world, whether it's Russia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, etc., Hungary, and it's true in Egypt, it's true in most Muslim countries, it's true in China, India, Indonesia, etc., is they say they respect the full guarantee of religious freedom, which is an attempt to satisfy the requirements under Articles 18 and 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations, which is the religious freedom and free speech clauses. And but their constitutions, basically, while they say they guarantee religious freedom, they only merely tolerate other faiths, and they reserve the right under what's called blasphemy law language, like in Romania, Article 19 of their constitution guarantees religious freedom, but then there's that language that inserts blasphemy law language, which basically
Mm.
says you have a right to peacefully coexist. So the doctrine of peaceful coexistence, which is very popular in the international world and especially in the interfaith um, movement. Um, and they basically emphasize this doctrine of peaceful coexistence, which means you have a right to peacefully coexist, but you don't have a right to share your faith.
Mm.
In other words, you don't have a right to evangelize someone else, which they
Mhm.
call proselytization, which they define as coercion. Now, in the Western world,
Mm.
in Western Europe, the United States, we believe in the free marketplace of ideas,
Yeah.
and and here we believe competition is good, and so therefore we say, okay, so sheep stealing, you can call it whatever you want, but a person has a right to convert. So,
Mm.
in other countries, like for example, I'll never forget um, President Barack Obama went to Indonesia, Jakarta, in 2010, and he praised their new constitution, which is their newly enshrined democratic constitution, which they had never had before, and it's called Pancasila, which is a five layer. Basically, 5 articles in our Constitution, which we
Okay.
have basically three
Yeah.
in ours. But it's basically built on the whole notion of the doctrine of peaceful coexistence. And basically, one of their illustrations is if you take all the religious leaders in that country, you put
Yeah.
them all in one room, and let's say you wanted to raise your hand and share your faith, you'd have to get the permission of everybody in that room. If one person objected, you wouldn't
Hmm.
be able to share your faith. So that's called collective censorship, which is antithetical to religious freedom. And I explained this to President Ted Wilson of our General Conference at a World Congress on Religious Freedom and Human Rights conference in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And we had all kinds of world ambassadors there from other countries and everything else. And it was really a big deal. And so I explained to him, because the emphasis was the doctrine of peaceful coexistence. And I thought, oh my, this is dangerous, because I said, do you realize that if you followed this to the nth degree, which is what they want to do,
Mhm.
these other countries in Eastern Europe and the rest of the world, they believe their model for religious freedom is better than the Western one. So they want to basically end evangelism as we know it. So what
Mhm.
would that do to the Seventh Day Adventist Church, where we believe in foreign missions and evangelism?
Yeah.
It would cut it completely off. How quickly would the third angel's message suddenly end in the rest of the world? So
Mm.
it's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah. So are we saying that it would become illegal to simply tell someone that I'm Adventist, or is it the act of like Bible study or providing,
If it's
materials?
uninvited, yes. If it's
Oh,
uninvited,
okay.
yes.
Okay. 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 Understood.
And
Understood.
even if it's invited in that kind of environment, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or wherever, it's a major risk.
Mm.
It's high risk. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Um, it is interesting because
We have lots of freedoms here, let's face it.
we really do, we really do, we really do, and we're privileged in that regard. Now, within the last couple of days, we have, Donald Trump has signed some authorization for ICE that I think it's going to be an interesting conversation moving forward as to what actually happens and how it's implemented. But he's authorized them to enter into schools and to churches to find any illegal immigrants. And I think it puts the church once again at a real crossroads. I mean, we have a lot of schools, and of course, we have a lot of churches. And from your perspective, what would you advise the local church to do in the event that ICE would show up at your church or schools? Should we take the stance of, civil disobedience? Are we to consult with legal, experts as to what we should do? Like like how should we move forward with this? Or what should we think about in terms of moving forward with this?
I'm not an expert in that area, so
Mhm,
that's a question that I really wouldn't know how to answer, and I don't want to misstep or misguide you.
mhm,
So I'll punt on that question. To be honest with you, I abhor um, the attempt
mhm.
by this administration, as I do many things with this incoming administration. But I don't want to get too political here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know that there's a lot of people who are discussing this conversation, and it's definitely something that we're going to have to pray about and figure out
I think
moving forward. Hmm.
I I think it's going to boil down to regardless of what the church would recommend or what I would recommend, it really will boil down to sure, there should be some general guidance, but in terms of cooperation with authorities, I think it's really going to boil down to the individual church and pastor
Hmm.
and people. Um, there is nothing wrong with civil disobedience, but as you know, we have to pick and choose our battles.
Yes.
And we do have a lot of ethnic minorities in our church that may not be so-called legal. Um, so I would say the best advice is make sure that if I was a pastor of these churches, I would say make sure all your papers are in order. Make
Hmm.
sure all your documentation is in order. If you have birthright citizenship, show your birth certificate. Um, and make sure you have backup copies and make sure you keep your original in a safe somewhere, and only show copies. Never give your original away,
Hmm.
because that one needs to be notarized. So that and a visa would help. Your driver's license helps. Um, your registration to vote would help.
Hmm.
I think all those things help. Your membership in a local church helps. Um, your baptismal certificate helps.
Yeah.
Um, your wedding certificate helps. All of those things. Keep your papers in order and keep them all together, because that's very important. If you need to shield someone, well, who doesn't have any of those things, I guess that's up to the individual.
Yeah.
Really, what it boils down to in individual families, which is risky. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we're living in a reign of terror essentially, and it's not pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. Those are great advice, and that's my pastor right there, our senior pastor, Pastor Lisa Smith Reed. She says now is the time to pray and ask God for leadership, and I would say even wisdom.
Hmm.
Moving forward, that we
Yes.
definitely moving with godly wisdom as we're navigating these waters. Um, so religious liberty. There's a lot of conversations that take place. I would say around the potluck tables. Um, that some of our members are a little unsure about religious liberty. Of course, we understand it from the perspective of protecting our rights to not have to work based on our religious, but there, there are questions about the legalities of it. Should we be involved? Should we have lobbyists? Um, uh, there are folks who are anti-political process. Should the church be involved in politics at all? That we should avoid that place because that's the muddy, murky waters of America.
Well, that's exactly what
Yeah.
Adventists did in Weimar, Germany, just before Hitler came on board. And when Hitler came on board, they washed their hands of everything. And so, because they didn't speak up, they allowed things to happen. I just, I think we have to be careful as a church. I think one of the things that leads Adventists to think that way
Hmm.
is what I call the doctrine of prophetic inevitability.
Mm.
Um, they think that it's and I would say false piety and the doctrine of prophetic inevitability. It's this
Yeah.
idea that, well, since it's all going to happen anyway, and they use that to justify their vote to elect a madman and a psychopath, if you will. And what happens is, what does that do? It says, well, it's all going to happen anyway. This is what happened during the time of Rome, and God protected his people, and we shouldn't do anything. And that's wrong. Ellen White even says that wrong. There's a statement. Let me read it to you. It's from the 5th volume of the Testimonies by Ellen White. It says the following. If I can get this paper open here. I don't know why it's not cooperating with me. She says on page 713 of the 5th volume of the Testimonies, let none sit in calm expectation of the evil, comforting themselves with the belief that this work must go on because prophecy has foretold it, and that the Lord will shelter his people. We are not doing the will of God if we sit in quietude, doing nothing to preserve liberty of conscience. Fervent, effectual prayer should be ascending to heaven, that this calamity may be deferred until we can accomplish the work which has so long been neglected. Let there be most earnest prayer, and then let us work in harmony with our prayers. It may appear that Satan is triumphant and that truth is overborne with falsehood or disinformation and conspiracy theories and error. The people over whom God has spread his shield, and the country, which has been an asylum for the conscience oppressed servants of God and defenders of his truth, may be placed in jeopardy if we don't get busy. In other words, she doesn't approve of apathy. In fact, one of the emphasis of Ellen White, and I think it's divinely inspired, is this whole notion of that we must help hold the 4 angels of Revelation chapter 7, hold back the 4 winds of strife so that more souls can be won. In other words, it's a call to unselfishness.
Yeah.
That is, instead of just sitting back and waiting for events to take place, which is usually used as a justification for their way they vote or their support for Christian nationalism, God forbid, which is we've been warned about in Revelation chapter 13. We've been warned about in the Great Controversy about church and state. In fact, she says, in order for the United States to form an image of the prophetic beast, that is, in the image of papal Rome, where papal Rome manipulated, dominated, and controlled kings and emperors, she says the religious powers must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish their own ends. What does that mean? It means that if we advocate for Christian nationalism, there's lots of issues. I mean, there's lots of issues that we can agree or disagree with, whether it's abortion or same-sex marriage or whatever. It's not about the wrongness or rightness of those issues, which I'm sure we can agree to find a lot of fault in terms of morality in the Bible. That's not the real issue. The issue is, are we on the wrong side or on the right side of prophetic history? In other words, are we going to be with the oppressors?
Yeah.
Are we going to be part of the oppressed? We have to really examine ourselves, because we're told in John 16, verses 1-4, Jesus said, the very people of faith, those in the synagogue, will think they're doing God a favor, a service by killing you. I mean, they'll think they're actually doing righteousness and doing God's service. So we have to be careful. There's another reference, Desire of Ages, page 509. It says, Today in the religious world, there are multitudes who, as they believe, are working for the establishment of the kingdom of Christ as an earthly and political dominion. They desire to make our Lord the ruler of the kingdoms of this world, the ruler in its courts and military camps, its legislative halls, its palaces, and marketplaces. They expect him to rule through legal enactments enforced by human authority. And since Christ is not now here in person, they themselves will undertake to act in his stead, to execute the laws of his kingdom. The establishment of such a kingdom is what Israel desired in the days of Christ. They would have received Jesus had he been willing to establish a political dominion, to enforce what they regarded as the laws of God, and to make them the expositors of his will and the agents of his authority. But he said, my kingdom is not of this world. Our kingdom is not of this world. And so, one more thing to answer your question. There's a lot of people don't realize that many of Ellen White's comments and counsel, contextually speaking, and regularly taken out of context, were addressed to Confederate and Lost Cause sympathizers during and after Reconstruction who opposed President Grant and those presidents following, who tried to carry out civil rights laws and uplift the plight of the black man. She was rebuking conference leaders and educators in the South during that time and elsewhere, including general conference leaders. This got her in trouble, and they strong-armed her to go to New Zealand and Australia, where she went and saw useful ministry there, and also being inspired to write The Desire of Ages and The Great Controversy. But we must remember about one thing about Ellen White. Ellen White single-handedly led the charge to oust the mayor of Battle Creek, who was an embezzler, womanizer, drunk, bootlegger, gambler, and suspected of being a murderer to retain power. The mayor stated in a newspaper interview that he was a shoo-in to be reelected because Adventists didn't believe in voting or taking political sides, particularly with political candidates. She therefore went from church to church, Adventist and non, and urged everyone to vote the mayor out of office. This was also the first time she urged Adventists to vote even on the Sabbath, because that was when polls were often open in those days. The mayor was voted out of office and later tried and convicted. I believe, Miguel, Pastor Miguel, there is a time and place for everything, especially when a clarion call is needed to warn against an extremely evil man and autocratic dictatorship.
Wow. So entrenched in the fibers of what it means to be Adventist. We have these individuals, Ellen White is one, who are willing and bold enough to speak against political individuals who don't embody what we believe that our leaders should embody. They're not demonstrating the character and judgment that we would want. And so it is a part of our belief to not just stay on the sidelines and allow things to happen, which I think when it comes to prophecy, we do speak about it from that inevitable perspective. I'm recalling when God approached, Abraham to tell him what's going to happen in Sodom and Gomorrah, that God entertained the conversation with Abraham that if, he goes from 40 down to 10, that he would hold off judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. And so
yes.
I believe that we ought to challenge the idea that things are inevitable. Things will happen, but it is it inevitable? Are God's judgments inevitable, or is there room there for grace and for things to kind of turn around? And that's something that I think we ought to have that conversation.
Well, I think there's one more thing I need to bring up, and that is what's called the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment is very important to understand. It's an amendment that Lyndon Johnson put forward when he was senator in 1954 in Texas, because he felt that evangelical churches in Texas, which is the Bible Belt, had an unfair advantage to basically cause him to be unelected. And so when he became president, following John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963, he put forward the Johnson Amendment. And what the Johnson Amendment basically does is it says that churches cannot endorse any political candidate or finance them, essentially. And which I think is a good thing for the most part. But the current president, when he was elected in 2016, tried to abolish the Johnson Amendment and allow 25% of local church budgets to be allowed to endorse and finance candidates that they approved of. Now, the
Wow.
Johnson Amendment has stood. It has not gone anywhere,
Hmm.
and he failed in that effort because it requires congressional approval, even if he put forward an executive order. In fact, most executive orders, if it has no funding from Congress, is pretty much a dead letter. Most people don't know that. Now, he can use that to enforce things because Congress is so slow, and so deadlocked that it allows the president to get away with all kinds of things at this point in our politics.
Hmm.
But one of the ways that you can, as a church, like as a pastor, your local church, you can invite a candidate as long as you invite the other candidate from the other party.
Okay.
And if if one doesn't show up, you haven't violated the amendment, and you haven't necessarily endorsed that candidate. So you can do that. The Johnson Amendment allows you to do that. But the problem is it's often used as a, let's face it, if a Baptist church or an Adventist church or a Mormon church or a Catholic church or an Episcopal church invites a candidate and they invite the other, they usually know that the other's not going to show up. So that's how they kind of get away with it. It's sort of it's easy to get away with because they know, well, we're not going to go to that church, and so on and so forth. Now, if they both show up, great. It allows churches to really, what do you call it, tacitly or feign support and their endorsement without saying so. But it's still, it's called if looks could deceive. I mean, it doesn't deceive anybody. In other words, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Gotcha. No, I would love for you to speak to. There's a segment of our church. And I'm not speaking of First Church specifically, but more so my community, African American community, that feels that they should disengage from the political process because what's the point, right? That our voices don't matter, writing letters won't matter. Some would
They
even
do.
go,
They do matter.
yeah.
I listen. Having worked in 5 state legislatures and having lobbied in Washington D.C. at Congress, and having worked in South Africa, the Philippines, Japan, Dominican Republic, and Romania, I'm telling you, it does work. And especially the thing that's interesting is if you go to Washington D.C., you may think you have no influence, but if you go and you make an appointment with, say, your local congressman, your local representative or senator or whatever, they will receive you. You may not meet the senator themselves, but you will meet a staff or advisor or chief of staff, and they will note your complaint or your suggestion. They will, you'd be amazed how much they will entertain you. And when I mean by entertain, I just mean, they'll receive you and listen to you. So don't think that you don't have any influence. Our country still has the most accessible form of lobbying and politics in the world, and especially at the state legislature. A lot of people, they think federal government is the thing, okay? But I'm telling you, the grassroots, whether it's your whether it be your school boards, city councils, county councils, state legislatures, being active in those arenas are very important.
Yeah.
I disagree with anybody who thinks that, well, they shouldn't do anything. I mean, I grew up when my mom, I would watch her write letters to congressmen, and she believed very fervently in that. She says they are not empty letters. They're not, you think they don't go anywhere. Well, I'm telling you, they do. What they do is when you make a call, let's say to a legislator, or you write a letter, what they do is they have a system. They put a tally. They have a tally system. So for or against this bill. Okay. So they do tallies. And so if you don't call in, you don't write, your tally's not going to make it. And
Mm,
your tally counts for something, just like your vote at the ballot box counts for something. It's, you help them to determine whether to go forward or not. And they do look to the will of the people. I mean, the Constitution, what does it say? Um, we the people is the beginning of the Constitution, the opening, the preamble.
mhm,
And I think we need to take that more seriously. And I think that's the reason apathy is what causes dictators to arise among us.
mm,
Let me read to you a statement. Just hold on a second. I'm going to read to you. I'm going to get up. I'm going to read to you a statement from a speech by Abraham Lincoln.
mhm,
It's on the back of my book. I wrote a book called Soul Liberty, Celebrating America's First Freedom. You can buy it at Amazon. And it says, Lincoln said in a speech at Edwardsville, Illinois, September 13, 1858, he said, familiarize yourself with the chains of bondage, and you prepare your own limbs to wear them. Accustomed to trample on the rights of others, you have lost the genius of your own independence and become the fit subjects of the first cunning tyrant who rises among you. And, it's if we're apathetic and we don't speak up, then
yeah,
we become complicit. We become complicit. And when we're complicit, we're allowing things to happen in the name of prophetic inevitability. I think that's one of the dangers of prophecy is that prophecy is good. It's good to know. But if we just assume that because, prophecy is going to be fulfilled and therefore we can just fold our hands and do nothing, that's the spirit of selfishness. And Ellen White rebukes that by the very reference that I read earlier. She
yeah,
rebukes that. And so I think, she was very active. She got very upset about that mayor. I mean, when
mhm,
she read that in the newspaper, what did she do? Oh man, she got her dress in a tangle there, and she went she went to all the churches in Battle Creek, and she got that mayor unelected, threw him out. And I mean, that's about as active as you can get. And then she was very active in the temperance movement, the prohibition movement.
yeah,
She was very active in that. She was very supportive of A.T. Jones going to Congress and um, speaking very eloquently against a proposed Sunday law by Senator Blair um, from Delaware. And no, we and here's another problem. We just assume, okay, we'll just wait till a Sunday law comes and then we'll act. Well, you know, when Ellen White says, in order for the United States to form an image of the prophetic beast, the religious powers must so control the civil government. All right. She's talking about evangelical in context in several pages later. She's talking about evangelical conservative Catholics and evangelical conservative Protestants coming together to control the civil government.
mm,
Okay. That's the definition of the prophetic image to the beast. That is, we become just like Rome. We allow the church to control the state. All right. So if we allow that to happen by saying nothing and not getting involved, we're complicit in that.
yeah,
We've allowed that to happen. So the doctrine of prophetic inevitability and this false piety that goes with it, we'll just, we don't need to worry about it. It's all going to happen anyway. And we'll just wait for the Lord to come back and say a prayer over it.
yeah,
Okay. Well, that's fine, but we need to be more active, especially if you're younger. I can understand the elderly if they don't have the energy to get out. I understand that, but write a letter anyway, and get involved. Get the address of your legislators. Find out, how to reach them. Texting them. They allow texts. You can email them. They take tallies from emails.
mhm,
They do all of that stuff. So, and phone calls, direct phone calls is the quickest and easiest way. You'll get somebody to answer, and they will tally. They'll say thank you for your voice, and they mark a tally when you call. And if you think they're doing nothing, don't believe that. They're doing something.
absolutely. I mean, definitely. As we're wrapping up, I'm praying that somebody, man, there was so many nuggets here. First and foremost, for me, our understanding of prophecy should not prohibit us from doing the work of Christ.
Yes.
You know, I think definitely in accordance with what Jason laid down in terms of our foundation of the supremacy of Jesus, that even in these last days, we should be demonstrating his character. And Jesus was not one to simply be silent in the face of injustice.
He took a
And
whip and cleansed the temple twice.
yeah,
Twice.
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, to see, and that's why I really appreciate you for having this conversation, because you can speak to a multitude of areas here, and from the ministry perspective to religious um,
Mhm.
liberty. You can really speak to that crossroads, because sometimes it seems as if they don't quite fit, but it does. It's in unison with our gospel, which is the gospel of freedom.
Well,
It is
I,
to live.
I
Yeah,
I have extra emphasis. Not that this matters because I'm ultimately Jesus is my King and Lord and Savior, but the reason why I'm such an activist is because of my heritage. I'm directly related to both Ulysses S. Grant, and we have family papers on him, and I'm directly related to Alexander Hamilton.
yeah,
And so I just believe in not only our country's heritage, but I believe that we live in a democratic society, a democratic republic. We have a responsibility as citizens to speak up.
yeah, yeah.
And if we forfeit that, then we're just saying, okay, we don't care about democracy. Let dictatorship happen. It's all inevitable anyway.
Yeah,
I mean, how lame is that?
yeah. And so we should, man. I don't know if anyone else feels that, but there should be a little fire burning within you after this conversation, that we cannot just be silent. And it doesn't matter who's occupying what position. That if we're seeing something that's going awry in our community, is going awry in our country, our state, whatever it is, that we do have the power and the authority to speak up. Now, that's the constitutional right. We have a God-given right to speak up and to do something about it as well, because we are the hands and feet of God. And so, I pray that you begin processing, man. How can I, be a part of this fight, and to be a part of this journey? And so, I'm so grateful for you, for coming on tonight, Mr. Hamilton. Now, Colorado is also one of my favorite states, and so whenever I'm in the area, I'll definitely give you a buzz, and I would love to tour your library. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, he is currently sitting in the library at this moment in time. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And man, I'm really grateful for your ministry and your perspective and your knowledge. And honestly, I think you've challenged our prophetic understanding or interpretation as to what we ought to be doing in these times. And so I thank you for that. And I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate your time. And I wish you
Sure.
and your family all the best.
And I
You
wish you all the best.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. Thank you so much. Now, you mentioned that you have a book, or do you have multiple books? What's the titles, and where
Um,
can we find it?
yeah, yeah. Okay, let me show you to you. Let me
Okay.
grab it here. Uh, Here we go. All right. It's right here. It's called Soul. Let's see if I can get it, the light here.
Yeah.
There we
Soul
go.
Liberty.
Soul Liberty, Celebrating America's First Freedom. What it basically is a coffee table book full of pictures, but it has two opening essays, which I wrote, and they were published in Liberty Magazine, by the way. And it basically tells how we got our three branches of government and how we ended up with religious freedom. And so, excuse me, those are the opening essays. And then what I do is I have all the texts of I have stunning pictures, as you can see here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but each of the quotes by the founders are in context. In fact, I've had this peer reviewed by several professors at Baylor University. And so I've got key quotes all the way through both the Declaration of Independence, which is in textual document here, and it's done in sort of an old antique style. So it's the most beautiful book you ever saw. It's got the signers of the Constitution, the signers of the Declaration. Here's the rotunda of the U.S. Congress, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
And And then it has the Constitution itself. It has the amendments to the Constitution, all of them. And then it has a Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations. And it has famous quotes like James Madison: "In a free government, the security for civil rights must be the same as that for religious rights." Or Lincoln himself: "Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and under a just God cannot long retain it." And then it shows one of the bills that I helped pass, the Oregon Workplace Religious Freedom Act, and I'm standing next to the governor there, and that sort of thing. And then it offers our services. So this went to every single legislator in 5 states: Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. It went to every single legislator in Washington, D.C. It went to every judge and civil rights attorney in the Northwest in those 5 states, and it went to every General Conference staff member, directors, every North American division, every union conference, every local conference, and all the schools and churches in the Northwest. So I had a sponsor for this book that financed this for us, and it promoted the Northwest Religious Liberty Association, and it promoted our international services in terms of helping countries with democratic reform and religious freedom, and also our litigation services and mediation services regarding workplace discrimination. And we also have a section in the back: how can you champion religious freedom in your local community? So it's a book that you can get sometimes for $1 on Amazon. Most of the time it's $7 or $5.
Okay.
But it's really worth getting. I would really encourage you to get it. It's a nice little primer for anybody who really wants to understand religious liberty and how to promote it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that.
And it's on Amazon.
Okay.
And it's called Soul Liberty: Celebrating America's First Freedom. And Soul Liberty was a statement by Roger Williams. Basically, soul means your soul, your conscience. Soul means conscience. So it means liberty of conscience. Soul liberty means liberty of conscience. Okay?
Awesome. And I just want to echo what Sister Hazel said in the comments here, which really kind of sums up, a large part of what was said tonight. As Christians, we must be a voice for the voiceless. Not speaking up is absolutely un-Christian.
It's a sin.
I definitely pray that this year will be the year for some of us who may not, who may not feel as comfortable, or maybe you don't have a history, that this year that we begin to really rethink our involvement in this entire thing. And what is it that Christ is calling us to be in these last final scenes of Earth's history? Are we going to be silent on the sidelines, or are we going to exemplify the character and the mission of Christ? So once again, thank you all for joining us tonight. I pray that you will have a prosperous remainder of the week. And for those who are in the Zoom, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for sharing. And I pray that you guys have a wonderful, wonderful time. Thank you again, Mr. Greg Hamilton. You have a good night. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, y'all. God bless. Until